Good afternoon, folks. We're just getting sorted. To the panelists, I think, Agata, if you can send Jeremy a link to the webinar, that would be great. Okay, I'm going to begin because people are coming on by the stream. So let's just get going and start us off. So welcome. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Embracing Risky Play at School and Beyond webinar and book launch. Oh, and I'm fuzzy there, but hopefully you can see that lovely book launch, or book rather. So my name is Kate Bume. I am a knowledge broker at the Human Early Learning Partnership, or HELP. And I'm going to start us off today with an introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to our experts and book authors. We had lots of interest in this webinar. We had over 450 registrants, which is very exciting, and also people from across the country and even some from international jurisdictions. So everybody, welcome, welcome. And we also know that many of you are educators and you're probably joining us after a full day of teaching and wrangling children. And so extra special thanks to those of you that are joining us from schools or in your last bits at the end of your day here. Next slide. So we want to start ourselves off in a good way by gratefully acknowledging that HELP's work at the Vancouver campus of the University of British Columbia takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And we hold our hands up and say, Haichka, thank you to the Musqueam for stewarding these beautiful lands and waters for over a millennial. And on the screen, what you see is a picture of the reconciliation pole at UBC, which is a very powerful reminder of the ongoing legacy of harm from the residential school system. And a reminder to us that we are in a university and that this is a colonial institution, and HELP is coming out of 2 days of meetings with the Aboriginal Steering Committee at HELP. And we're going to put a link in the chat in a moment you can learn more about who they are. But it's a group of elders and experts and leaders in their field from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across BC and, in fact, Canada. And they have been working with us for over 20 years to guide our work. And coming out of these 2 days, we are working hard to hear and listen from their many, many teachings about how we can do a better job of building relationships and understanding with the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples we work with across the province. And just wanted to take this opportunity to really thank them for another beautiful moment of learning and meeting together over the last couple of days. Next slide, please. So some quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the HELP website when it's up and ready. And we'll send a follow-up email when that's available, along with any resources that we share in the chat or as we go in the webinar. At the bottom of the screen, you will see that there is a Q&A button and a chat feature. So we would love to invite all of you joining from all kinds of places to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know what territory you're calling in from this afternoon. You can use the chat to put some comments in if you like, but please direct your questions to the Q&A feature. And at the end of this presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion. The next slide, please. So HELP is, for those that don't know, HELP is an interdisciplinary research center focused on children's development and well-being at the University of British Columbia. And this year, HELP is celebrating 25 years, our 25th anniversary. So 2.5 decades of supporting children's health and well-being through research and through data. And in the next slide, you can see we recently released a report called the Early Years Disrupted. And we'll put a link to this in the chat. So this is showcasing our 20 years of data collection through the Early Development Instrument, or the EDI, data in BC, looking at the pre- and post-pandemic trends in the developmental health of kindergarten children in the province. And you can see on the slide that the report garnered a fair amount of media attention, which was very exciting. However, the story that we were sharing through that report is a concerning one. The report highlights that post-pandemic We have the highest developmental vulnerability rate that we've had to date over those 20 years of data collection in the province, with 35.8%. So over 1/3 of children arriving at school vulnerable in one or more areas that we know through our own research are important to their future success in school and beyond. And we see in that report that we are particularly concerned about social and emotional development of children. And the report outlines how powerful the influence of socioeconomic context is on early experiences and in turn healthy development. So we encourage you to check it out. And we certainly hear from our many school district partners that we are grateful, and thank you to anyone on the call that has helped us collect these data over the years, for taking the time to collect with us. And we hear from those partners that, yes, kids are showing up in kindergarten with different challenges than they have maybe had in the past, that they are needing some more support. So next slide, please. Because here's the good news. We're in for a real treat today with this presentation, because it's actually all about addressing the question, so what can we do? What are some actual strategies we can embrace that will help support children's development and well-being? This is the book launch. You're going to hear about the research that's included in this book and some of the resources that will be helpful to you. I think that this QR code on the screen will take you to how you can actually order the book, and we'll have a little bit of a free giveaway at the end for those that help us with our feedback survey. And next slide, please. So with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers and the authors of the book, Embracing Risky School at School, Getting Kids Outdoors to Explore, Learn, and Grow. I'll start with Dr. Mariana Brussoni, who is HELP's director, a professor in the Department of Pediatrics and the School of Population and Public Health at UBC, an investigator with BC Children's Hospital Research Institute and BC Injury Research and Prevention Unit. Dr. Brussoni is a founding member and part of the leadership group of Outdoor Play Canada, an internationally recognized and award-winning researcher and policy influencer in the realm of outdoor risky play. And her work was featured in, hopefully you can see that, not quite, The Anxious Generation, which was a New York Times bestseller by Jonathan Haidt, who also referenced you in the Trevor Noah podcast, by name too as well. So lots of great attention on the work that you are doing, research you are doing. And she is joined today by her co-author, Dr. Megan Zeni, a researcher practitioner, master gardener with a PhD in curriculum studies from UBC. She's a collaborator with the Outside Play Lab at UBC and an honorary research associate at HELP. She brings 3 decades of K-7 teaching experience to her outdoor play and learning, or OPAL, research, and has developed a plethora of related teacher resources, which you're going to hear about some of them today. And she's also a teacher consultant with the Richmond School District and has told us that she's calling in from a school library. So this is learning on the fly, or presenting on the fly. And then this webinar is going to be moderated by Rachel Ramsden, who is a PhD student working with Dr. Brussoni and others and is part of the Outside Play Lab at UBC. Rachel's research investigates children's outdoor play movements, behaviors, and perspectives to understand how the design of outdoor play spaces influences outdoor play. So you'll see her towards the end of the session today. And with that, I'm turning it over to you to take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kate. It's such a pleasure to be here. And as I'm looking through the list of participants, there's some people I recognize from very far away. So thank you for joining us. And hopefully it's not too late in the middle of the night, but such an honor to be here with you all today to talk about this book and to share with you some of the findings in the book. And such an honor for me to be here to present with my co-author and really the superstar of this work, Dr. Megan Zeni. You can reach us, just so you know, get all sorts of resources and information on our website, which is listed here, outsideplay.org, as well as Megan Zeni's website. And of course, we're on all sorts of different social media. So please sign up to follow us on all of those. So this book really is based on Megan's PhD work with teachers across this country who do this work. So first digging in with teachers in British Columbia and thinking about what is it that they wish they had known when they were starting out, and then expanding it to teachers across the country. And with those teachers creating together a tool, which you see here, that you can access at outsideplay.org, a tool for teachers, and which is the basis of this work. So this is like, what do the teachers think that other teachers would appreciate knowing, and acting as a digital companion for teachers as they work to bring their classroom outside. But what we found was that we could only go so far in the tool, and it's a free online tool that anybody can access, that we needed to go a bit deeper, and that there were some questions and logistics that were easier to explain if we could put together in a book. Hence, the creation of this book, which has now been published, and we're happy to celebrate that with you today. So, over the course of our time today, we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are, why we wrote this book, and give you an overview of what the book covers, hopefully to give you enough incentive to go and pick up a copy and have a look for yourself, and hopefully find lots of very useful information within the book. So one of the ways that we love to start these talks is usually I ask people to think back to their favorite play memory. But in this case, we're talking about school. And so we would love all of you to think back to your favorite school play memory and what that was like. What kind of play you were getting into? What did you get out of it? Where were you in the schoolyard or beyond? Who was supervising? And importantly, why is this a memory that sticks in your mind? Why was it important to you, or something that you really want to remember? And when we do these things in person, it's so much fun to hear these stories. If you can post them in the chat and you're comfortable doing that, would love to hear them there. But I think it's really striking in terms of, when we ask people about their favorite play memory versus their favorite school play memory and how different those can be. And for those of you who are educators, to think about how does this differ in terms of your favorite school play memory from the kinds of play that you were able or willing to offer children in the learning environment that you work in? And how does this memory align with how you support play currently in your professional capacity? So I've been working in risky play and access to outdoor play for a very long time. And what we uncovered quite a while ago is that if we wanted to think about equitable access, to make sure that every child has access to this kind of play every day, then we need to go to the places where they already spend their time. And hence, we've been doing a lot of work in childcare, and now this deep, deep work with schools. And I think it's easy for us to forget that the way that we have been learning about the world as a species for millennia is through play. We are evolutionarily designed to learn through play. If you think about all of the key skills that you learned, it was through play. And when it comes to risk-taking in play, risk and uncertainty are such a critical part of life, from learning to walk, to learning how to cross a street, to navigating complex relationships. It's very important that kids have exposure to these kinds of experiences, microdosing, if you want to think about it. And it's incredibly powerful and potent if that happens through play. And so the question isn't whether children will encounter risk and uncertainty, but how well prepared will they be when they do so? And so before we go any farther, let's introduce some terms so everybody is on the same page. So what do we mean when we talk about risky play? What is risky play? Well, the definition we use in the academic literature is thrilling and exciting forms of play involving uncertainty and a chance of physical injury. And so I want to break down each aspect of this definition because it's quite important. And the quotes that you see here are actual quotes from children that come from the dissertation work that Dr. Ellen Sandseter did, who's a Norwegian researcher who really laid the groundwork for this research around risky play. So if you think about the first component of this definition, thrilling and exciting, it's the thrill and excitement that comes from kids pushing themselves past where they typically have. So maybe climbing a bit higher, sledding a bit faster, going a bit farther in their travels, independent, through their neighborhood, those kinds of things. And it involves uncertainty. They don't know what's going to happen. It could be good. It could be bad. It could be neutral. But that's kind of the point in terms of they're experimenting with the world, they're experimenting with their body, they don't know what's going to happen. And that is also part of the thrill and excitement. And if we get back to what I said just a moment ago, it's also part of preparing children for navigating an uncertain world, which is something that they have to do every single day. And the last part of this definition, the chance of physical injury, is when you're moving your body in new and different ways. And really, when you're moving your body at all, of course, you increase your chance of physical injury. And so, because of my own background in developmental psychology and in particular in injury prevention, I've spent quite a bit of time digging into this aspect of the definition. So, how likely is physical injury? Because this fear has been such a limiting factor in children accessing this kind of play. And so, is it justified? Should we be limiting this kind of play? And so, we'll be talking about that in a moment. One thing I want to point out about risky play is that it doesn't necessarily look the same for all kids. Some kids are more adventurous or less adventurous, have more experiences, have different desires. And so it's not really up to us as adults observing play to comment, this is risky or this is not risky. It's up to us to prepare the environment for them to be able to engage in this kind of play as they choose. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go as well. So the research has been really building. It's been incredible in terms of all of the work that's happened, even in the last 10 years, around the impact of outdoor and risky play on children's health, well-being, development, learning. And so you can see here some of the aspects that are affected by this kind of play and how it really cannot be, you can't replace it with any other kind of play. And so if you think back to your own favorite play memories, a lot of this might be beyond intuitive in terms of the kinds of things you experienced, hanging out with friends, figuring things out as you went along, the joy and fun that came with kind of limitless opportunity, being able to run and jump and shout and move your body in ways that you wouldn't be able to indoors and figure out, different kinds of movements and physical literacy skills. And so it's quite natural that you would get a lot of benefits from this kind of play in terms of the social, learning to engage with other kids, emotional, managing quite strong emotions like thrill and excitement and other emotions, disappointment, etc. Physical development, cognitive, play by its very characteristic involves quite complex sequencing of things, children setting goals, figuring out how to attain those goals, sustaining their attention long enough to attain those goals, pivoting when things don't go well, being flexible in terms of where they're going and how they're getting there. Creativity, risk management, so learning from managing risks in one context and how far their body can be pushed, how the environment reacts to their body, things like gravity, slippery pavement, etc., and those kinds of skills that are then taken into other circumstances where the stakes are a lot higher. Lots of aspects for physical health. Kids are much more physically active outdoors than they are indoors, and especially in risky play. And even things like myopia, with ophthalmologists recommending that we get out 3 hours a day, that children do when they're growing up, to reduce the likelihood of short-sightedness. Benefits to mental health. In terms of, as you can imagine, we talked about kids navigating the world and uncertainty in the world. And so what we've seen is more and more kids who are not prepared to navigate uncertainty. And so then uncertainty is seen as something dangerous or hazardous, something to pull away from, rather than something to lean into and maybe learn from. And so you have this loop of anxiety that can happen with kids who aren't comfortable with or prepared to engage in risks as part of their everyday life. And of course, when you're engaged in play, risky play, things can go wrong, things can go right. Things go wrong, and one of the really important learnings is that you can handle it. The world didn't fall down on your head. It's okay. It goes on. And so that is really a powerful lesson for a sense of resilience and grit, building self-confidence. And also when things go right, understanding that, wow, I did it. I figured it out on my own or with friends, without an adult telling them what to do. So the research is just growing and growing and growing around the effects of this on kids. And we go deeper into the research specific to the learning environment in the book. But I wanted to share some exciting new research. It hasn't been published anywhere. This is analyses that we have done recently, looking at the data that we have in our data set at the Human Early Learning Partnership. And so we have a data set that's been in place for over 20 years. And it looks at key parts of children's life cycles and where we can hear how they're doing, do a bit of monitoring around their well-being, their health, their development, their learning. And so we took two of these instruments and we looked across them. So the first instrument is the CHECK, which is the Childhood Experiences Questionnaire, which parents fill out when kids start kindergarten. And then those same kids, a few months later, the kindergarten teacher fills out the early development instrument to tell us a bit about how they're doing. And there's 5 scales that come out of that particular instrument that we'll show you in a moment. So we looked at the most recent data that we have, the latest cohort where we have data for both the CHECK and the EDI. And it was almost 5,000 kids that we did some analyses on. And so in particular, we dug into 3 questions that were on the CHECK. So the CHECK is just a reminder, the questionnaire that parents fill out telling us what happened to the kids in early childhood. And there were 3 questions around average time spent on screens, in outdoor play, and also opportunities for risky play in the last 6 months. And so just to give you a sense of how this sample was performing, we had 53.6% of the sample that had more than an hour a day of screen time. And that in our sample, we considered high. We had 53.5% of the sample that had almost daily or daily experiences with outdoor play, and 36.6% of the sample that had almost daily or daily opportunities for risky play. So you can see how it really went down from opportunities for outdoor play, which really was only, half. So almost half the kids are not getting outdoors on a regular basis, and even less of those kids are having opportunity for risky play. And so then we took these data and we looked at, okay, so these experiences with screen time, outdoor play, and risky play, do they predict how kids do assessed by kindergarten teachers on the early development instrument? And so I'll show you what that shows. So first of all, and I think it'll be surprising to no one, that screen time was a really important predictor of children's showing up as vulnerable on one of the 5 EDI scales. So compared to kids who had less than an hour a day, those who had more than an hour a day were 59% more likely to be vulnerable. And the other thing you can see on this slide is the 5 scales of the EDI and just how much vulnerability increased as a result of increased screen time. And so you can see, for example, that physical health and language and cognition were the ones that were most affected, but all of the scales were affected in increasing the odds by at least 50%. Okay, then we looked at outdoor play. So what impact did that have? And it wasn't as powerful as screen time, but it was still there. So those kids who had daily or almost daily outdoor playtime were 26% less likely to be vulnerable, in particular on the communication skills and general knowledge subscale, compared to kids who had lower outdoor playtime. So even their opportunities to be outdoors and the frequency of that impacted how well they did on communication skills and general knowledge. Really interesting. Now, I think that this is where things get, for me, were really exciting, is when we looked at the risky play. Because what we found was that that was an even more important predictor than outdoor play. And so the kids who had daily or almost daily opportunities for risky play had 18% less likelihood of being vulnerable on social competence and 35% less likely to be vulnerable on communication skills and general knowledge, and also with overall vulnerability altogether. And so what these findings tell us is that outdoor play is important, but it's actually not enough. That this kind of risky play is important over and above the benefits they get from outdoor play to help support development of social competence, communication skills and general knowledge, and even overall vulnerability. So the Canadian Pediatric Society has recognized the importance of risky play for a couple of years now. So at the beginning of January, they published their position statement on the importance of outdoor risky play and recommending an all of society approach to supporting children's daily experiences with risky play and to encourage their pediatrician colleagues to let parents know about risky play and to think about risky play as one of the ways to help prevent and manage the conditions that they see most in their offices: obesity, anxiety, and behavioral issues. Okay, so just to give you some context, I mean, many of you might intuitively think, the kids are playing less than they were playing when I was a kid, or even when my grandparents were a kid. And so I wanted to show you some data around how much this has changed over time. It's quite striking. Now, these are data from the UK. We don't have comparable data in Canada, but what data are available suggests that we see the same patterns, if not more striking. And so looking at children's daily time use from 1975 to 2015, what we see is an almost 30% drop in outdoor play and about a 16% drop in socializing outside of the home. So a big drop in unsupervised outdoor, out of the home in real life activities. What have these been replaced with? Well, screens have really shot up. So you see about a 22% increase in screen-based activities, as well as homework and sport. And so just to be clear, it's not that sport, we're discouraging sport, but sport is not a substitute for play. It has lots of benefits, but they're not the same benefits. And so because they're, supervised, adult-controlled activities, we really want and need kids to get those experiences where they're in control, where it's self-motivated, they're figuring out what they want to do. I would also point out that these are data that stopped in 2015. And I think many of us are familiar with the fact that screen time has gone up even more, particularly with sharp increases during the COVID pandemic that haven't been leveled out. So why is outdoor play and risky play, why is it so manageable? Well, these are some of the common characteristics that are just inherent as part of outdoor play. And these are the things that actually can help us understand also why it's so important for learning and in the educational environment. And so you have things like when the conditions are right, when we put them in place for kids to play the way they choose, and Megan will talk a bit more about that in a moment, kids will take risks. And we just talked about all the benefits of risk taking. Outdoor play is intrinsically motivated. The kids are leaning in, they're engaged. And so if you think about engagement with learning, there's no better way to do it. There's constant creative problem solving. They're voluntarily taking on cognitive demands, very complex cognitive demands, and testing their executive functioning skills. They're hanging out with other kids, so that social engagement we know is so important and enriching. It's constantly shifting environment, constantly shifting circumstances that they have to adjust to. There's consequences. Sometimes those are bad consequences, and they have to deal with them. They have to learn to manage them. They have to keep in mind very complex ideas and sequencing. And of course, there's exposure to nature, which the research around that is just quite massive and how important that is. And as well as they are more physically active. And we know a lot about the importance of physical activity for all sorts of aspects of children's health and well-being. And so really to summarize in terms of how these things distill into the learning environment, they really are key in fostering the conditions for effective learning. And so what we see is that engagement with learning can go up. There's the benefits of exposure to nature, of physical activity. Social engagement and connection has a lot of benefits that are extended to students in the learning environment, and the lift to mental health and well-being. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Megan to talk very specifically about outdoor play and learning.
Okay. Hi, everybody. The co-host has asked me to start my video. There we go. Start my video. See if that works. Can everybody see me? Yeah, there I am. Hi. Okay. So it's important to remember. So Mariana has set the table beautifully for this conversation, part of the conversation now. Thank you, Mariana. It's important to remember that the conditions for risky play are really only found when outdoor play and learning, which the acronym that we often use is OPAL, when those conditions for risky play are only found when OPAL is well established in a school's play culture. So when learning environments are designed to offer optimal conditions for risky play, that's time, space, and freedom, it can begin to emerge in schools during recess or at lunch breaks, but especially, and what we talk about a lot in the book, is during instructional time. So OPAL refers to the ways in which teachers can scaffold and guide children's play to meet required learning objectives. And this is where the conversation around risky play and outdoor play and learning is in the school years is different than the conversations that we have in the early learning space, the preschool years. Because of course, teachers in the elementary school context, any part of the formal school system, are required to report on learning. And so the report card writing piece has to be part of the conversation when we talk about what outdoor play and learning looks like in the school context. And so when we're talking about teachers meeting required objectives, here in this image, for example, you're seeing, and we talk about this example in the book, you see children playing with a conceptual understanding of how water can shape the land. So water and ice shape the land. And specific geographic landform vocabulary. So for example, you might introduce the idea of how hills are different than mountains, how, valleys run between, and rivers, all of that is connected. What an island is and how it's entirely surrounded by water. This kind of play really offers an opportunity to engage with the creation of landforms, because this kind of learning is experiential, and experiential learning is very sticky learning, especially when working with abstract concepts. And this kind of play, if we're thinking about how water shapes the land, or we're thinking about like a particular curricular outcome, like landforms, this is going to be much more meaningful learning than having children label a worksheet, for example. Um, in the book, and certainly for schools that are new to outdoor play and learning, um, in this case, there's play with tools happening here. We recommend that one adult often be assigned as a bit of a play coach, maybe we could call them, to improve the consistency of messaging across a school. This helps really build school-wide play culture and eliminates one of the major concerns that teachers cite when we talk about risky play in schools, which is their own sense of professional vulnerability. So this coaching colleague, or in my position, I'm a teacher consultant. It could be a prep teacher. It could be a relief teacher. Sometimes I know in the US, they're called specials. A librarian, a support teacher, even the school principal. It doesn't really matter who that person is, but we want it to be somebody who really understands how to work through play problems, and not necessarily somebody who makes reactive decisions. So this really, having this person in place in a school will really quickly shift the play culture of a school, because it does relieve teachers of the burden of trailblazing what is allowed and what's not allowed in each school context. And it does align school-wide expectations for accessing and returning tools, for example. So here we've got kids with, the hand rakes and the shovels. How do they access them? How do they return them? It's a lot like a library or a gymnasium in a school. It helps to have somebody whose job it is to coordinate and align how we use these shared resources in a school. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So this model comes from my dissertation work, and in the book we go into quite a lot of detail about how children experience play at school along a continuum. So all play is valuable. We're not here to say that one kind of play is more valuable than another kind of play, but they do offer unique benefits. And sometimes when I'm working with teachers, they're not aware that there's unique benefits for different kinds of play. And then how do we create the conditions for play that is responsive to what children need? So when we think about play with rules, it's often an important precursor to risky play, because teachers have to establish group cohesion and have confidence in the recall routines that they've established when working with public school ratios of children, which is often one adult to maybe 25 children. And so for risky play to exist in schools, like beyond those preschool years where the ratios are very different, there must be strong instructional routines in place that support children's play and learning outdoors. So in the book, we describe how risky play is only possible when children have those ingredients of time, space, and freedom to play. And there's a lot of detail about how teachers can create the conditions for various kinds of play, including how they curate loose parts and the affordances of those loose parts. So for example, low affordance materials really inform a child how to use them. And they're most often available when you look at the continuum when we are thinking about explicit curricular learning. And when teachers create a play environment where it's teacher-directed play and explicit curricular learning is the goal, often their belief around the purpose of play at school is that it's a form of practice, that we're going to practice something that I've explicitly taught, and I've created a play condition so that children can practice a skill. And really low affordance materials are often what we see in that condition. So an example, for example, would be offering various replica pollinator kind of toys, so bees or butterflies, maybe with a provocation for children to show the teacher what they know about pollination using loose parts. By limiting a child's freedom to represent their thinking with only using particular materials, teachers can start to focus the learning on objectives for assessment purposes. So sometimes that's why we see play look like that in schools. But at the other end of the continuum, at the child-directed play end of the continuum, that's where sometimes people call that free play or unstructured play. Loose parts in this kind of play is often very high affordance materials. That's where those materials are found. And these materials are only guided by the child's imagination. And the objects that they might choose to play with are sticks or stones or pine cones. And those objects can be used to represent whatever form or function the child requires in their play. There's a lot of description about this in the book, and I'm happy to take questions at the end if there's a ton of teachers in the audience that want more information. But ultimately, what I want to leave you with from this piece is that teachers really influence how children experience play at school, and the learning environments that we create, and that like a teacher's own personal belief about the value of play at school, and then the affordances and how they curate materials can really extend or guide all learning and really directly impact that child's experience of play or learning, and really influence whether or not risky play can exist in the school context. Okay, next slide. So just a reminder that if adults are restricting any one of these ingredients, time, space, or freedom, it's really hard to find risky play in the school context. So when we think about play along that continuum, we can begin to understand how the affordances that we select as teachers and the choices that adults make in curating the play materials that children have access to can shape children's access to risky play in the school context. Okay, next slide. So sometimes when we talk about risky play, and if somebody, I imagine you're all here because you're interested in risky play, but if you're new to the concept, it's really sometimes helpful to define what risky play is not. And so I want to remind anybody listening to this who is working with children that teachers do have a specific and explicit duty of care to maintain the play environment and remain vigilant for emerging hazards. Of course, risks are different than hazards. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Recall routines and protocols need to be established. And sometimes that's at the teacher directed end of the continuum. So if we're playing command games like go, go, stop, we're practicing making sure that children are listening to our voice so that we can build group cohesion. Because if we're taking a group of children outdoors, we need to have some confidence that we can move cohesively as a group. So risky play really in the school context is a gradual release of responsibility for children learning to take care of their own bodies. And it's really important to remember that we don't teach risky play. It emerges authentically when the conditions that the teachers have created are in place. So when children have that time, space, and freedom to make their own decisions about where they play and how they play and who they play with, you'll start to see risky play emerging. And, a reminder again, that when, teachers make decisions, we can go back to the risky play slide. When teachers make decisions about what children play, who they play with, how they play, and if teachers are refereeing the play, so think about when children are practicing, because that's play is practice at that end of the continuum, sports or music, it's really highly structured by adults, and kids get a lot of that at school. So when we're thinking about the risky play conversation, we want to be thinking about how we're being responsive to what children need. So we're not teaching risky play, but I want to really highlight that risky play is not obviously defined by teacher directed play, because that's not where it emerges, but it's also not anarchy or an abandonment of a teacher's duty of care. So it's responsive to what children need. It's responsive to the land. It's responsive to the materials that you've curated. It's complex, but it's not neglect. It's not recklessness, and it's not encouraging children to try things. And we're certainly not teaching it. Okay, next slide. It's obviously the supervisory responsibility of adults to anticipate, identify, remove, or limit exposure to known or emerging hazards. So hazards are different than risks because they are objects or situations that can create a higher likelihood of serious injury for children. And often we see that because of a lack of lived experience. So genuine hazards, they do exist that do need to be attended to, and adults are responsible for those. So for example, something that one of our speakers in the tool referred to as unsafe garbage. I think that's such a great descriptor of anything that's been inside the human body. So condoms or tampons, any of that sort of debris in the schoolyard you have to have a management plan in place for that before children are playing in public parks or schoolyards where that is a common occurrence or even an occasional occurrence. Wildlife encounters are a reality for many of our rural colleagues. Unexpected and unpredictable people can also be an emerging hazard. And there is no singular benefit risk assessment that covers an entire school staff. Teachers must spend time out on the land and observe children play so they can be responsive to emerging hazards, which are often seasonal and very place specific. So when we think about risks versus hazards, so in this example, we're talking about keeping children as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible. In the risk category, that is a slide that exists at the Terra Nova Nature Park in Richmond. The opportunity to take children to the park is the teacher's invitation for children to play, but the decision to go down that pretty rad slide is up to kids. We're not telling them they must do it, and we're not telling them that it's too hard or scary for them. It's up to children to make their own decision. Whereas the green slide under the hazard is, it's rusty, it's broken, it's not been maintained. There's a high likelihood of serious injury for a child. And so as the responsible adult, we are reducing or eliminating access to hazards. And while we talk about slides, because this always comes up when I work with teachers, especially in the school context, where they will talk about children wanting to run up slides. And so I'm just going to take this opportunity. This is in the book. We write about it a lot, but I want to really strongly encourage school staff to rethink our sort of tendency as educators, maybe, to frame undesirable behavior as unsafe. So we need to name behavior as inconsiderate or rude because it's really confusing for children when we tell them, for example, that running up the slide is unsafe. We need to get better at helping children build situational awareness. Like, hey, friend, there's 10 kids waiting to go down that slide. This is not the time or the place to be running up it because everybody's waiting to go down. And then maybe as a staff, you're like, all right, this is like a thing that kids want to do. So can we make it at like up the slides Wednesdays? And everybody lines up at the bottom of the slide on Wednesdays, and the slide only is for running up on Wednesdays. Make it how you want to make it. But we want to start teaching kids time and place and we, not me, and all of those important social skills that can come through this kind of play. Okay, next slide. An important nuance in the risky play conversation is that risks can really easily become hazards when conditions in the play environment change. So the arrival of extreme weather, if you've got bears in your community and a bear wanders into the schoolyard, or you have a swarm of stinging insects arrive, deteriorating air quality, these all present hazards in outdoor play spaces. And so adults are entirely responsible for recognizing, avoiding hazards and also having a plan in place to avoid them. When supporting outdoor play and learning with children in schools, this is called dynamic risk assessment. It's part of a teacher's professional duty of care. And I use this example because sometimes when people are learning about the difference between risks and hazards, I give this example of like, this is from Whistler. We like to ski as a family. This is a green run on Whistler. And so if you've ever been skiing into the Alpine, you know that they use a color code to guide you down the mountain. So green is the easiest route. Blue offers some challenges, moderate challenges. Maybe there's some trees or some moguls. Maybe it's a little bit steep. And a black diamond is for experts. It's a very, very challenging route, and it will probably have all three. It'll have steep terrain, trees, and moguls. Of course, double black diamonds are super difficult. But in this case, Vail is the supervisory adult. They have made a decision. They've gone and said, okay, it rained and then it froze. So this green run is no longer the easiest way down. This is a really challenging route. And you can see this teenager here on a snowboard has just plowed past that sign, didn't pay attention, and he's now sort of rethinking his life choices. Because the conditions in the play environment have changed, it's really important that we're teaching kids situational awareness. Because sometimes when they get out into the backcountry or they get into the real world, that sign might be all you have to warn you that you're getting into some really dangerous terrain here. You need to pay attention. Okay, next slide. So an important understanding that guides our discussion of risky play, and we write about this a lot in the book, is that safety is a feeling. The reality of life on our planet is that we can very rarely declare with any certainty in any given situation that it is safe for everybody. When adults declare a situation to be safe for children, they can blunt the development of the child's situational awareness for assessing risk. And likewise, when adults project their own feelings of discomfort or safety concerns, it can be more about their own fears of bad luck. So we recommend that adults refrain from telling children how to feel. Now, of course, if you're anaphylactic to bee stings or a child is anaphylactic to bee stings, this situation is going to feel very unsafe and would actually be hazardous. This would be dangerous for somebody who has anaphylaxis. But if you have no history of anaphylaxis, this is a lovely way for children to connect with the biodiversity of their schoolyard ecosystem. And children love petting bumblebees, and they're very gentle garden creatures. And, some children, and I've spent 30 years working in schools, some children love letting spiders crawl all over them. Like, that does not make me feel good. But for some kids, they love it. So, for everybody, safety is a feeling, and it's just a really important part of this conversation. Okay, next slide. I'm going to talk or show some of the images of what risky play can look like in schools. This is play with height. There's multiple categories of risky play that have come through the research. Ellen Sandsetter's work originally identified 6, but since her original publication of this work, there have been multiple other studies that have started to show different kinds of risky play. If you're familiar with play schemas, some of these line up. It's risky play isn't like one thing. There's ways we can observe it and the ways that children are thrill seeking in their play. And playing with height is often where children get that scary, funny feeling. So it can include, of course, hanging, swinging, jumping. Anytime children play with height, the risk of injury is from falling. Next slide. Of course, that scary, funny feeling is different for every child. When you look at these children, this is also play with height, and their body language tells us that they're very uncertain about the play that they're experiencing. And it would be very unlikely that these kids are going to hop to and climb up that tree. They're not going to immediately progress to tree climbing because this, for them, gives them that scary, funny feeling. They're having multiple opportunities to get up and fall down and get up from small heights. That's building their confidence, their resiliency, their overall physical literacy. And, the more I learn about this, the more I learn that that actually builds bone density too, right? All that jumping and hopping and running. Okay, next slide. So play with speed can include spinning or sledding or chasing or swinging, and it includes a risk of injury from collisions or falls. Adults are responsible for ensuring that children comply or adhere with any regulations that are required for or safety precautions like helmets. If you're ice skating, for example, children should wear helmets. If you're skiing, they should wear helmets. Sledding, often there's multiple opportunities where children should wear helmets when they're sledding. Milder grades, less necessary. You have to use your discretion, but if there is a requirement, then absolutely you should ensure that they comply with that. The other piece that's nice about sledding, I think, in a lot of schools, that's a no-go. They don't allow children to even touch the snow, let alone play in the snow. But in some communities, we can really support the overall play culture of school by supporting children with group norms and co-creating rules for engagement that makes the play they choose after school on weekends actually safer. Because in many communities, children after school, if the school doesn't allow them to sled and we're not teaching them how to like clear the landing zone and all of those pieces so that they're not getting hit from behind by somebody at high speed, we can teach them some of these situational awareness pieces that moves that kind of play from hazardous to just risky. Okay, next slide. This is also play with speed. When nature offers a play affordance, like a great rolling hill, go for it. The only instruction from the teacher from me in this was go play. I'm not encouraging them, and I'm not saying go roll down that hill. I just took them to this zone and said, hey guys, go play. And of course, naturally, organically, kids will start running and rolling up and down hills. So I just hold space for the play to emerge. And when obvious boundaries present themselves, like you can see at this hill, there's pathways that are sort of bordering this little hill. I use them. Don't go past the pathway. I don't want to preload risky play with a lot of rules, and we don't want to complicate it with a lot of arbitrary rules. What I'll usually do is just say go play, and then if I'm noticing kids running past the pathways, I might say let's keep it inside the pathway. So it depends on the kids, them best. You have to use your discretion and your professional judgment around what kind of front loading you need to do with your group. But generally speaking, we don't want to front load risky play with a lot of rules. Okay, next slide. Play with tools. Tools are introduced to children as something that's separate from toys. So we use our imagination when we play with toys. Tools have a job. So we need direct, explicit instruction when we're introducing tools at school. The risk of injury, of course, is from distraction or misuse of a tool. Teachers must remain vigilant and directly supervise tool use. And this is a good reminder that to remind everybody who's listening that risky play supervision is best done in relationship to children. So it's really difficult to add complexity like power tools to children's play when they're unknown to supervisory adults. So if you're working as a teacher on call or it's September in kindergarten, don't bring out the power tools. That's not the time or the place. This sort of play is most achievable in a classroom setting. We're not doing this at recess. And it's easily aligned with learning standards. Here in British Columbia, we have an ADST curriculum that this kind of learning is really nicely aligned with. In other jurisdictions, we see schools building maker spaces. So certainly play with tools at school can be possible. We just have to create conditions and make sure that we are using all the safety equipment. Okay, next slide. So just a reminder that we are not teaching risky play, but we can create the conditions for risky play, right? So an easy and obvious introduction to tools at the earliest stages of school entry is scissor play. Most kindergartens arrive at school with very little experience using scissors. And so we can significantly improve a child's dexterity and hand strength by provisioning opportunities for children to practice cutting, sunflowers or weeds or just sit in the grass with a bucket of scissors. It's a really low prep way for kids to practice building hand strength. You can also create yes spaces so that kids are not deadheading your entire garden. Okay, and I'm noticing the time, so I'm going to jump on to the next one. Let's go to the next slide. So play with elements and in proximity to dangerous elements. So that's like water, cliffs, ice. That requires hazard management. It's not suitable to say, hey, it's risky play. Like you as the adult need to have a handle on where you're taking these children. Of course, you visited the location prior to taking a whole class of children into a wild space. Really clear boundary markers and strong recall routines are essential in these kinds of group learning environments. Like when you call them, they need to be coming because something could be changing in the play environment. You need to know that you have good recall. This kind of play is highly effective for teaching situational awareness. So, because of course, when children constantly have adults holding their hands and telling them when it's safe to cross a road, for example, they don't build the kind of situational awareness that this sort of play offers. Okay, next slide. Those strong core routines are essential for ensuring group norms and hazard management. And I need to remind you here that risks, of course, can become hazards in relationship to the developmental abilities of your learners. Children with poor impulse control may not be ready for a fire circle. And of course, teachers must use their professional judgment and adhere to local bylaws and district protocols before engaging with elements that could become hazardous. If you have a open burn bylaw in your municipality, like you can't do a fire. Sometimes adults just have to be the adult. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is about hiding. Play away from an adult supervisory gaze is a very common play schema for a lot of young children. Again, we're not encouraging children to hide from us. We're not going to say, let's go hide from the teacher. But when we see that play behavior, and children are trying to hide in hedges along a school field, or they're seeking nooks and crannies to disappear into. Instead of saying no to that kind of play, we can offer an alternative to satisfy that play schema. And so these sort of affordances for play are also really helpful for children who need respite from the noise and chaos of an early learning classroom or even into the intermediate or middle school years. Some children really need time alone during the day to regulate their nervous system. And so I often, when I'm working with really dysregulated children, they really benefit from having a little hidey hole space that they can go to and just be alone in. We talk about this in the book as well. Okay, next slide is about rough and tumble play. It's often the first to emerge when we give children those three ingredients: time, space, and freedom. You're going to have kids laying hands on other kids. That's the first thing that usually emerges. And so it can include stick fighting, chasing games, wrestling. It's really any kind of play where children are touching each other's bodies. And this kind of play is so important at school because it really offers time and space for children to practice what consent looks like and what it feels like. We want children to know what it feels like for a partner to lose enthusiasm for the play because it no longer feels safe for that child or enjoyable. And we want to give children ample opportunities to exit play that no longer feels safe or enjoyable for them. And we want them to have lots of practice with asking for consent, giving consent, and then rescinding consent before they become sexually active. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Rough and tumble play. This one is scaffolding situational awareness for children to build their risk management skills. So here cones have been added to visually help other children steer clear of the kicking legs of this game. And we're creating a lineup for the kids that want to play next. It's really important in rough play that every child has consented, and you'll need to make protocols for that. We give lots of tips in the book. And make sure that everyone understands the rules of engagement. The role of the adult in this kind of play is to really watch for coercion, especially as children get older. They'll start coercing other children to play rough that child doesn't actually want to play rough, and watching for abuses of power. Of course, we're going to step in as supervisory adults when we see that, and we're going to redirect that. Okay, next slide. Play with impact is super satisfying for many children. We're going to add in affordances when we observe this kind of play to extend it. Play with impact often includes breaking things, smashing objects like snow and ice, wood, or rocks. We see a lot of that in the schoolyard. Next slide. When we add in affordances, like in this picture, you can see that I've added in some potato mashers to smash the snow with. It just extends the play for some children, makes it more interesting, and gives them that satisfying sort of smash on the concrete. You can, if your play with impact is becoming a problem in your schoolyard, you can create a yes space to redirect play that can quickly become problematic on school grounds. So on the last slide, when we were looking at the snowball throwing, we talk about that a lot in the book. Throwing snowballs can be a problem in schoolyards, so you want to create a yes space for that. Let's go to the yes space slide. So throwing snow, throwing rocks, all of these things are not necessarily hazardous or problematic, but yes spaces are co-created with supervisory adults to ensure that everyone who's playing is agreeing to a defined rule of engagement. And it almost always emerges from play that children initiate. So yes spaces are responsive to children's play and offer a positive way to redirect behavior that makes adults feel uncomfortable. So throwing rocks is not really a problem, but throwing rocks are a problem if kids are throwing them at windows, if they're throwing them at cars, if they're throwing them at other children. So when children are throwing rocks or throwing snow, we want to create spaces where the conditions that we're creating are lowering the risk for children to engage in hazardous play. And then I'll teach children how to consent to the play and then how to leave the play. It also makes supervision for other teachers at recess or lunch easier because instead of saying, no, don't touch the snow, don't throw the snow, you can just redirect it. You can do that, but you have to go to the throwing space, right? And that's being directly supervised by an adult. Also, the other thing that's interesting about play with impact and all the other kinds of risky play that we see in schools is that you can create a yes space that's specifically for demolition, right? So when you have lots of snow and kids have made beautiful snow structures or shelters, and then other kids are coming out and just kicking it and breaking it, you can create a yes space that is specifically for demolition. And then those kids are satisfying that need to kick and smash and break, but the kids who actually want to make something can rest in that play. They're not worried that their creation is going to get demolished, and supervisory adults aren't run ragged trying to keep all the kids that are causing the problems from wrecking other kids' stuff. We create a yes space where this is where we're going to build stuff to break it. That's where it happens. And it starts to create zones of play in the schoolyard where everybody can enjoy their play. Okay, next slide. So the last thing I'm going to say, why we want risky play in schools, we've given you lots of good information. But there's a lot of emerging evidence from my own research and of course from multiple studies since I've published mine that outdoor play and learning is really being shown to improve teacher job satisfaction. When teachers are happy and healthy, they come to school and they stay in the job longer. So job satisfaction and improved retention are what we're starting to see. So yay for that. All the reasons why we want to do this for children, but for the teachers who are watching this webinar or here today, I just want to say it's also really good for us. So even if doing it for the kids is still a bit question marky, do it for yourself. It's good for everybody. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Mariana.
Thank you, Megan. And some of you might be wondering, what about recess? Why don't we keep this type of play to recess? And certainly recess is incredibly important. But the problem with it is that recess is short. And so it doesn't give enough time for children to work out conflicts, get everything resolved before they come back into class. And so what you end up having is that the recess kind of bleeds into class and you have children arguing within the classroom as they're trying to manage those conflicts. And so what we need is more time for play, not less. Furthermore, by building these routines into regular teaching and learning experiences, then you get those kinds of norms that bleed into the recess, and so everything becomes more manageable for everybody. So I had promised that we would talk about how likely is injury. You remember the definition of risky play was thrilling and exciting forms of play where children engage with uncertainty and there's a chance of physical injury. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. And so one of the big, we talked about the three key ingredients to outdoor risky play: time, space, and freedom. And when it comes to freedom, by and large, It's adults and adult anxieties that limit this kind of play. And so what are we afraid of? Well, mostly we are afraid of things like injury, liability, and those kinds of things. And so I just wanted to run through some injury stats to show you how likely is it that kids would actually get injured from this kind of play. And so if we look at the statistics across Canada, and so all of the data that we have around injury deaths, and in this case, looking at falls from play equipment, because there's very few codes we can look at that we think are related to play, and these are two that are quite helpful. So you can see the years that are covered here, 2007 to 2022 for falls from play equipment, and then 23 years, 2000 to 2022 for falls from trees. And so I can tell you in the 23 years covered by 2000 to 2022, there were about 2,200 kids that died in that time from being in cars, a passenger in a car. And so compare that to the likelihood of death across all of those years from falls from play equipment and falls from trees. It really doesn't even compare. And yet we've elevated it in our minds as something that is so horribly dangerous that we shouldn't allow kids to engage in that behavior. Now, what about medically treated injuries? So these would be more minor injuries where the kids might need to go to the emergency department or go to the nurse's office to get treatment. What did those look like? So there was some research done looking at the amount of medically treated injuries by exposure time. So this was the time that kids actually spent doing the activity. And I think a lot of people would think that play is the most dangerous activity. But when it was actually looked at in terms of the amount of time that kids spent doing this, sports made its way to the top. So when we look at the strict numbers, you've got play actually as a higher number. But when we consider the time spent, it's sports. And yet you don't have the same kind of anxiety and concern around sports and the limiting of kids being able to actually engage in this kind of behavior. So we'll wrap up very soon and get to the question and answer section. But I just wanted to remind you, I mentioned at the beginning of the day of this webinar that there's this teacher tool. Please go have a look at it. It's packed full of very short, very approachable kind of little videos with teachers actually doing this work. And then, of course, have a look out for our tool, or sorry, the book itself. We've had really wonderful feedback from our amazing colleagues around the world, and are excited to get it out to you and to hear what you think of it. You can order it from any retailer, and we're encouraging people to go to the Outdoor Learning Store because it also supports, the proceeds support their charity. So thank you very much, and let's just move to the Q&A.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, the Q&A has been busy, so I've been in the background trying to answer a few, and I've brought forward a couple that I think are of interest to everyone. So I guess first, one that seems to pop up is related to the fear of liability and injury. So the question is, how would you respond to agencies who are concerned about liability, particularly with the level of risk? And I guess this relates to parents, agencies, schools, systems, if you are the teacher or otherwise trying to facilitate this form of play.
Do you want to start first, Megan, and then I'll
Yeah,
answer?
I mean, when the conditions are built, when you have an adult who understands what unstructured free play along the play continuum, what the purpose of that play is, and how we've created the conditions for it, risky play is not inherently unsafe. There is a risk that there could be a minor bump or scrape, but ultimately, it's not an unsafe practice. So we have to be aware of hazards. Hazards could produce some kind of unexpected injury. But certainly, when adults are in relationship with the land where they are creating the conditions for risky play and they know the children, the likelihood is very low because it's so relational. I wouldn't take a group of children that I had just met today into an area that I had never visited before. That would become, reckless. And so it's risky play is not neglect and it's not recklessness. And I think that that really has to guide the conversation. Sometimes my own children will say things like, I'll say, okay, this is a little bit, I'm uncertain. And they're like, it's risky play, Mom. I'll be like, no, it's actually hazardous what you're getting into. So, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what risky play is. People think it's dangerous, and it's really when the conditions are created, it's just play. It's just children's play, and we are just simply holding space for children to make their own decisions about their own bodies. So the liability thing often comes up when people don't really understand the concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as I mentioned in the webinar, in a lot of the way that we make decisions around this are based on managing our own fears as adults. And so it's what I call anxiety-based caregiving. And that also applies to, say, schools or other institutions making decisions around what kids should be allowed to do. They're managing their own anxiety in those issues rather than looking at the evidence. And I presented some stats, injury stats. We have lots more. And really, I've worked with insurance. I've worked with licensing officers for those in childcare situations. And as Megan points out, it's not only the relationship with the kid and the land and the environment, it's also the relationship with risk managers, with insurance, with licensing officers to show the thoughtfulness that has gone into the risk benefit assessment so that you can get to yes. And you can figure out, what are their concerns and how do you talk through them. Everything is possible. It just takes time and patience and information, which if you need more, reach out, but certainly there's
Read the
lots.
book.
Yeah, read the book.
Thank you. So I guess just to build on that, we've had a couple questions around how do how does one go about engaging with teachers and administrators and I guess the school to allow and support this type of a play. So if you have a school that is currently not doing it, how do you get it started? Maybe there's parents on the line that are curious about how to support this. Are there guidelines for a school to kind of kickstart supporting this play at their school?
Yeah, so I mean, outdoor play and learning as a concept, but risky play specifically, is responsive to what children's play is. So all we have to do is offer those three ingredients: time, space, and freedom, and then say, go play. And often when I'm working with teachers that are uncertain about this, because safety is a feeling and teachers have a right to feel safe. So I will say, I will hold the responsibility for the children's safety. Like I am the responsible adult. You can just observe. And that often that mentorship or that coming alongside a colleague can really relieve, because that anxiety comes from uncertainty, right? And so when a teacher is uncertain about what the outcome will be, another colleague, and that's where that sort of singular adult in a school system can be really supportive. It really helps to have like a PE teacher or a prep teacher or somebody who's working with all the children in the school to be giving that consistent messaging and creating those conditions so that every child has access to it across the school day. I've seen it where it's the vice principal. The vice principal is accessing children at recess time. They have access to them during the school day. They can be in and out. And you just want to create that culture, but it often depends on the conditions that teachers create and that the teachers themselves feel safe to create those conditions.
I think what I found too in our conversations with schools is, near the beginning of the webinar, I presented all of the many benefits of outdoor and risky play. And so because there are so many benefits, anybody can find themselves and what they value is important in those benefits. So for example, right now around the world, we're having challenges with mental health. We're having challenges with engagement with learning, even literacy and numeracy. And so the fact that we have more and more research showing how important and how much this type of play and outdoor play and learning can help with those particular outcomes, it can be very persuasive for educational settings to start on this journey. And then also what we would encourage schools, it really is, it has to be an all of school approach to be really successful because it's very hard for, if it's one teacher or two teachers not feeling that they have the support of the system, that can be very challenging. So trying to work together as a school with colleagues to make a change of the culture.
Thank you. We had a comment related to how there seems to be a gap in this area of research on how to support risky play in the middle school years. So, thinking about grades 6 to 8. Do you think this is the case? And how can schools facilitate risky play for this age group? And they gave an example where specifically, thinking about a middle school, they often only have access to a sports field as their outdoor space.
Yeah, that's a bigger question. I mean, that's out of my wheelhouse. My wheelhouse is really the elementary school space. I know from as a parent perspective, um, they'll have ski club and they'll have other clubs where kids can come together, ADST, maker spaces, tool use. Like they're actually creating the conditions for children to explore. There's a lot more complexity to the play when youth are involved because they're more skilled, right? So it's really simple. To remove access to a shed roof for a young person because they're just not physically big enough to get up there, but teenagers can get up there. They can, so it starts to get more complicated for sure. But in theory, I would argue that if they've had the right exposure to it as young children, that they're making decisions that are protective for them as youth. But if they're
Mm.
not getting that exposure, I mean, Mariana, maybe you want to pick up here, but if they're not getting that practice, when they're young children, it can be catastrophic, the decisions they make as youth. So yeah, it's super important that they have exposure. It's never too
Mhm.
late.
It's never too late, exactly. And as you say, it can be more complicated, but not impossible. And we've done a lot of research with these, the tweens and kind of early teen years, and really, really powerful findings around how they felt designed out of play spaces and other places to gather as being too boring, not challenging enough, or that they're not wanted in those spaces. And so I think it really is critical that we think about their needs as we're building out the community supports to make sure that they also have access to these kinds of experiences.
Thank you. We have a question on what do you consider as roughhousing or tackling? So, thinking about rough and tumble play, is this risky play or unsafe? And maybe just to build off that, like what would be some boundaries or how would you facilitate that form of play?
Yeah, so for me, it's always a responsive. So if I give kids those ingredients, I give them time, space, and freedom. I've created the conditions for child-led play, and I see tackling and roughhousing emerge, then I'm going to gather them together and I'm going to talk about what I'm noticing, and then I'm going to introduce them to the idea of asking for consent. So all that has to be scaffolded and modeled. I wouldn't front load it with a lot of rules, but I do tend to make sure that kids have some kind of acknowledgement that they've agreed to that play. So if they're going to be tackling somebody from behind isn't good sportsmanship, right? Like that's what is the play? How are they going to play? The kids can co-create all that. You have to look at the conditions, if it's muddy, if it's slippery. There are some games that I have seen kids create that make me as a supervisory adult a little uncomfortable. And I mean, another piece that we talk about this in the book is I will let it go, but I think the most important piece of this is end it while it's going well. Because where risky play falls apart is when teachers let it keep going until it becomes a giant fist fight. And that's not risky play. That's aggression. That's violence. It's only play when everybody's having fun. And so if somebody's consistently being tackled and jumped on by somebody else, that's not play anymore. That's aggression. And so as a supervisory adult, we have to have a conversation with these kids about how are you asking for consent? That might be the game that they're playing, is that they're jumping on each other's, like that might be the game. And if they've all consented to that, but I'm giving it my full attention if that's what's happening and making sure that it's still fun for everybody. And children's body language, their faces, that's why it's so important to be in relationship with these kinds of kids. I wouldn't let kids I had never met as a teacher play like that because I have no idea of whether or not this is fun for them. I don't know these children. So it's really important you're in a relationship with the kids. It's really important that you end that kind of rough play while it's going well. And that might be 3 minutes. Like your spidey sense as a teacher goes off. You're like, this is going sideways really quickly. We're going to end this. You guys can pick this up again next time. Like we can shut that down. And then their tolerance and they understand how to play. So everyone's having fun. I hope that helps. Some of it's just experience, right? You sort of figure it out as you go along. And having that co-teacher beside you can really build your own professional tolerance. Um, Sometimes as mothers, we get a little uncomfortable with boys roughhousing. But I'm a mother of boys, so it's made me more tolerant as a teacher. Sometimes you just got to find a colleague and be like, who is the right person to help me with this? Because I feel really uncomfortable with this. And it's, yeah, so you got to work through it. And as a school, you can, in a staff meeting, you can add that to your agenda. Like, what do we need to make a yes space for? Because we're noticing a lot of tackling. So, can we make a yes space at recess so we have 1 or 2 teachers that are directly supervising this? Because most of the time, like that rock throwing example, once you let kids do that, it plays itself out. All this sort of resistance and the argument, like the power struggle, is diffused because you're saying yes. You're just giving some conditions around where it can happen and making sure that kids have consented and like co-created some agreements. So there's not one answer. Wouldn't it be nice if there was just one ingredient for this?
Thanks, Megan. A lot of the examples you provided had a lot of natural materials. So we have a question on how can school districts incorporate the greening of schoolyards to facilitate risky play when there's sometimes a concern about the added cost of maintenance, particularly during non-school times. And for example, if you have shared space. So just thinking about the environment, how you can set it up when maybe it's a shared space and have some barriers from the school or city or surrounding areas.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with schools that are extremely rural and have all the affordances that nature provides, and I've worked with schools that are extremely urban and don't even have a playground on site. They have to go to a public park because they don't have any playground at the school. So, and everything in between. It's really a mindset, a belief that children will make some play if you give them the time, space, and freedom. Certainly, many communities build, if you build it, they will come. I know the school that I worked at for a lot of years, that whole schoolyard, especially through COVID, everybody hosted birthday parties there. The families came after school, weekends. It was summer. It was very, very popular for the community, and we just left everything out throughout the summer. From time to time, you'll encounter difficulties, but you have to deal with that on a needs basis. Some communities have like a shipping container, for example, that they'll put things in at the end of the day. Sometimes you have to bring things in temporarily. I know certainly at the school that I worked at for a lot of years, kids would be roofing tires. They'd be throwing them up on the roof. So you got to put them away at the end of the day for a couple of weeks. A lot of play just wears itself out, right? Kids are kids. They play, they push boundaries, they push limits. So sometimes we just have to appreciate that that's part of their experience of play at school. And then we're trying to create the conditions. Some things are tolerable and some things are not tolerable, and every community has a different tolerance for that. With regard to the trees, yes, everybody should be greening their schoolyards, adding all kinds of nature affordances, especially with the climate issues that we're having, offering shade. It's it's an ongoing issue. So yes, I absolutely think that more trees, more there's lots of grants for this, by the way, as well. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so maybe. Do you have anything to add to that, Mariana?
I think you covered it very well. Thanks.
So we have a question about how do you recommend educating parents about risky play when you first introduce it to them at school?
Well, I can introduce our tool, and then Megan, you can talk specifically about schools. So we have a tool for parents on our website. If you go to outsideplay.org, there's a tool around, we call it a risk reframing tool, but it's around getting them to think differently around their fears and worries around risk and how could they support risky play in their kids' lives. But in general, in the school, I talked earlier about how important it is to have this be a whole of school community experience. It applies for the parents as well. And so if the school is all on board and has a consistent, values, goals, objectives around what they want to get out of providing these experiences to kids, then the most successful way to do this is to communicate constantly with the parents about this. And so, as soon as kids are starting kindergarten, the parents are hearing about it. They know why it's being done and so on. And ideally start to see for themselves the benefits that their kids get out of this. And so then it kind of becomes a non-issue. I don't know, Megan, if you want to add anything to that.
I think it really helps when schools like here on the west coast of Canada, a lot of our schools call it a West Coast recess. So it's very clear to families that children go out every day, no matter what the weather is. So you need to dress your child to be outside every day. And then, of course, when children are outside playing, they encounter all kinds of fun ways to spend their time. That communication piece is really important. I know in my early years, trying to normalize this in the school, way back, I feel like in the olden days when we used to have school assemblies, because COVID kind of killed the school assembly cult thing. But I used to make sure at the very beginning of an assembly, I would put up an image or talk to families about what we were doing and the importance of the play and give a very short little story about it. It's slowly sort of helping parents understand that this is really valuable and here's why it's valuable. And what their entry point is. For some families, they want their child to enjoy school. For some families, they want their child to have a healthier appetite and eat more and sleep better. And for some families, they want that, there's so many reasons. And so sometimes finding out why they're resistant, and becoming familiar with their research and sort of the arguments for risky play, we can just cherry pick the entry point for them and offer them resources to support that reason. But in short of that, a systematic approach is obviously favorable as well.
Perfect. Thank you. How much time do you think we have? Got a couple more.
Sure.
Maybe one more.
One more? Okay. And for those of you, if your question hasn't been answered, there's an evaluation form at the end. So you're welcome to pop in any challenges or information in that form. And yeah, sorry if we couldn't get to all of them. So maybe we'll end with there's a question on just wondering if schoolyards are in. So when we're thinking about the environment and how to support this form of play, do you think that the existing infrastructure we have at our schools is enough, or if you had kind of a magic wand, is there something you would change?
It costs a lot less money to do this. I mean, school playgrounds are like extraordinarily huge expenses. And different jurisdictions charge, and the responsibility for paying for that rests in different spaces depending on which jurisdiction you're in. So certainly, if you want more bang for your play buck, foregoing the built playground and having very loose affordances and materials, straw bales and tires and mud kitchens and all of these stumps and rocks and all of these pieces. It's very, very affordable, this kind of play, and it actually offers so much affordance for children. It's quite joyful play. So the role of the teacher and the school staff is to be responsive and adding, as you add in higher affordance materials, you can extend that play. And for children who are struggling with just what do I do with all these sticks and rocks, you can add in some more structure. Like a mud kitchen would be a highly structured play environment. You can put tables and stumps, and there's lots of ways we can curate these environments that helps children find an entry point for play. Increasingly, I find children are entering kindergarten with very little fantasy, small world, pretend play experience. So we have to give them more scaffolds and more support in the way of low affordance materials so they can access the play. And then we start to remove those and replace them with higher affordance play materials when they have some experience and some skills to play, because all children know how to play. Just sometimes they need the right environment to find their way into it.
I think the only thing I would add to that is really how the research is building around the importance of greening school grounds, and how that even impacts the children's outcomes in terms of their academic learning. And so just the importance for kids to be surrounded by nature and natural materials in and of itself is an incredible benefit. And then, of course, you have the loose parts and all of the wonder that that can provide. So, and as Megan says, it's less expensive. It makes a lot more sense. So maybe what I'll do now is I'll just share the link to the survey. So please take this survey. Let us know. Whoops, am I sharing? Not yet. There we go. Let us know what you thought of the webinar itself. You can enter to win a copy of the book if you fill out the survey. And I think there's also the link is in the chat for those of you who also want to access it that way. And please sign up for Help's newsletter so you can stay connected to all of the work that's going on and hear about future webinars and activities. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you outside.